Patricia's husband had always assured her that he was infertile, and when she discovered her pregnancy, she was convinced it was a miracle. Eager to share the news, she hoped it would be a moment of joy, but everything turned into a nightmare when he accused her of infidelity. Now, 18 years later, an unexpected encounter with the past was about to reignite feelings that seemed dormant. Hello, my friends. I am Linda, and this is Linda's Love Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. Edward had always been a young man with an upright posture, heir to a traditional family of high society. At 25 years old, already graduated in law and working at his father's firm, he maintained a methodical routine that included daily visits to a charming cafe in the city centre. The place, with its dark wooden tables and the intoxicating aroma of freshly ground coffee, was the gathering point for the local youth in the 60s. It was there that Edward first saw Patricia. She was 23 years old and had a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. Her brown eyes would slightly close each time she laughed, conveying a contagious joy. Patricia frequented the cafe with her group of friends from the history college, where she was in her final year. Edward was quickly enchanted by the young woman with wavy brown hair and a sweet demeanour. He observed her discreetly over his newspaper, pretending to read the news while actually studying every detail of Patricia's graceful gestures. However, something bothered Edward: the constant presence of John, a tall young man with glasses who always seemed to be around her, laughing at her jokes and casually touching her arm. Taken by a mix of curiosity and jealousy, Edward decided it was time to get closer. On a sunny autumn afternoon, he saw Patricia bid farewell to her friends and walk alone towards the bus stop. With a racing heart, Edward followed her and offered a ride in his new car. "Hello, sorry to intrude. I couldn't help but notice you're leaving alone. Would you like a ride? I promise I'm not a weirdo," Edward said with his best smile. Patricia hesitated for a moment, but something in Edward's kind gaze made her accept, and besides, she knew Edward by sight. "All right, thank you. Actually, I need to go home and rest. Tomorrow is my first day as a history teacher at a local school," she replied with a mix of nervousness and excitement in her voice. During the journey, they talked animatedly about books, music, and dreams for the future. Edward was charmed by Patricia's intelligence and sensitivity. As he dropped her off at home, they exchanged phone numbers and agreed to meet again. This was the beginning of an intense relationship. Edward and Patricia quickly fell in love, sharing common interests and complementing each other. She brought lightness and spontaneity to his methodical life, while Edward encouraged her in her career as a teacher. The only point of tension was Patricia's friendship with John. Even after the relationship with Edward solidified, John continued to be present at group gatherings. Edward tried to remain cordial, but he couldn't avoid a twinge of jealousy whenever he saw the two engaging in animated conversations about some historical topic. 3 years passed, and the couple began planning their wedding. Edward's mother, an elegant and somewhat snobbish lady, insisted on organising a grand celebration. Although she considered the teaching profession very simplistic for her future daughter-in-law, the matriarch approved of the marriage, charmed by Patricia's refined manners. With 1 month left until the ceremony, Patricia began to feel anxious about the final preparations. One afternoon, while leafing through decorating magazines in the living room of Edward's parents' mansion, she decided to bring up an important topic. "Edward, darling, there's so little time left before we get married, and we still haven't decided where we're going to live. I've been showing you several houses for us to rent, but you don't seem to like any of them. We need to resolve this soon, or we'll have to live in your car," she joked, trying to lighten the mood around the subject. Edward hesitated for a moment before responding. "Actually, Patricia, my parents insisted that we live here in the mansion with them after the wedding. The house is big. We'll all be comfortable. You know how attached my mother is to me. She'll suffer a lot if she doesn't see me every day." Patricia looked visibly upset. "What do you mean, Edward? Why didn't you tell me this before? I thought we would have our own house, our own space." "I'm sorry, darling. I should have mentioned it earlier, but I thought you wouldn't mind. We can discuss it more after the wedding, calmly." Edward replied, trying to soothe the situation. Patricia decided not to insist on the matter at that moment. After all, the big day was fast approaching, and there were many details to resolve. She saved that conversation to revisit later when they had more time to plan their future home. The wedding was a magnificent event, worthy of the pages of social magazines. The impeccable decoration reflected the good taste of Edward's mother, with white flowers everywhere and an elegant reception in the mansion's garden. Patricia was radiant in her lace dress, and Edward couldn't take his eyes off her. However, a moment of tension arose during the party. Edward spotted John among the guests and felt his blood boil. He didn't know that Patricia had invited the friend. "Why is John here?" Edward asked, trying to contain the irritation in his voice. "Now, Edward, he is my friend. I invited our entire college group, you knew that," Patricia replied, surprised by her husband's reaction. Edward took a deep breath and tried to hide his discomfort. After all, it was his wedding day, and he didn't want to create any awkwardness. The rest of the celebration went smoothly, with the newlyweds dancing and receiving congratulations from the guests. The first weeks living in the mansion with Edward's parents were peaceful. Patricia was making an effort to adapt to the family's routine and the expectations of her mother-in-law. However, gradually, the situation started to become uncomfortable. Patricia felt more like a guest than a resident of the house. Edward's mother seemed to always be around, giving her opinions on the decor, the meals, and even on how the couple should spend their free time. Patricia had the feeling that she couldn't truly be Edward's wife in that environment. Whenever they planned an outing for just the two of them, Edward would end up inviting his parents to be agreeable, and they would invariably accept. Patricia realised that she had more moments of privacy with her husband before the marriage than now, living under the same roof. When Patricia tried to talk about the situation, Edward would change the subject. "You're exaggerating, dear. We don't even spend that much time with my parents," he would say, downplaying his wife's concerns. And so the first 2 years of marriage went by. Patricia periodically insisted that they move to a place of their own, and Edward always promised to think about it, but he never took any concrete action. It was then that Patricia decided to bring up a topic she had long wished for: having children. One night, while they were dining alone in the couple's bedroom, she brought up the subject. "Edward, I've been thinking, I believe it's time for us to start trying to have a baby. What do you think?" Edward's face turned pale. He placed his fork down on the plate and remained silent for a few moments, as if searching for the right words. "Patricia, there's something I need to tell you," he finally said, his voice trembling. "I can't have children. I'm infertile." Patricia was stunned, unable to process what she had just heard. "What do you mean, infertile?" "Edward, ever since we were dating, we talked about having children, and you never mentioned anything about this." Edward lowered his eyes, visibly embarrassed. "When I was a teenager, I had mumps. It was a very severe case. The doctor said it made me infertile." Patricia felt as if the ground had disappeared from under her feet. Having children was a dream she had nurtured for years. "How could you hide this from me, Edward? You had no right to do that." At that moment, drawn by the raised voices, Edward's mother entered the room without knocking. "What's going on here, Patricia? Why are you yelling at my son?" "I'm not yelling at your son, I'm yelling at my husband," Patricia burst out, for the first time letting slip 2 years of accumulated resentment. Unable to handle the situation, Patricia took some clothes and went to her parents' house. She needed some time to process everything and decide what to do. The next day, Edward went to his in-laws' house to apologise. He admitted that he shouldn't have hidden such important information and promised that they would look for a house to move to, away from the influence of his parents. Patricia, who loved Edward deeply, decided to give the marriage a second chance. After all, she thought, they could seek treatments or alternatives to have children. The important thing was to rebuild their relationship on more solid and honest foundations. In the following months, the couple moved into their own house, and their relationship seemed to be better than ever. Away from the constant presence of Edward's parents, they were finally able to build their own routine and intimacy. One afternoon, Edward arranged to meet Patricia after work at the coffee shop where they had first met. However, upon arriving, he was unpleasantly surprised. Sitting at the table with his wife was John, the old friend he had always been jealous of. Edward felt his blood boil in his veins. Patricia, noticing his discomfort, hurried to explain that they had met by chance, that John had just arrived. But the seed of distrust was already planted in Edward's mind. A few weeks later, Patricia made a discovery that should have been a source of immense joy. She was pregnant. With her heart racing, she prepared a special dinner to break the news to Edward, hoping he would receive it with happiness. However, Edward's reaction was completely different from what she had imagined. "Pregnant? What do you mean pregnant?" he asked incredulously. "Who is this child's father? How could you do this, Patricia?" Patricia felt as if she had been slapped. "What do you mean, Edward? Of course you are the father. What do you think I am?" "You know that I am infertile, Patricia. This child cannot be mine," said Edward, his voice trembling with anger. "It must be that idiot John's, isn't it?" "Edward, I swear the child is yours," pleaded Patricia, with tears in her eyes. "The doctor must have made a mistake, or it's a miracle. I would never betray you. I love you and—" Edward didn't let her finish. "You have 2 hours to gather your things and leave this house," he said, slamming the door as he left. Patricia stood there alone in the dining room, unable to believe what had just happened. What should have been a special moment had turned into a nightmare. With a broken heart, she grabbed some clothes and went to her parents' house, where they welcomed her with open arms. The following months were difficult. Patricia tried several times to contact Edward, to explain the situation, to ask him to reconsider. But all she received were divorce papers, with infidelity alleged as the reason. It was the mid-70s, there were no DNA tests to prove paternity. Patricia found herself alone, pregnant, and with her reputation unjustly tarnished. But she was a strong woman. With the support of her loving family, she moved forward. A few months later, she gave birth to a beautiful boy, whom she named Christopher. The years went by. Patricia dedicated herself to raising her son and to her career as a teacher. Christopher grew up to be a brilliant and athletic young man, passionate about basketball. 18 years after that fateful night, destiny was preparing an unexpected encounter that would bring long-buried truths to the surface. It was the opening night of the college basketball championship. Patricia was in the stands, eager to see Christopher, now a promising freshman, make his debut on the university team. That's when she saw him. Edward was there, a few rows below, as elegant and distinguished as he had always been. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Edward approached, trying to mask his nervousness. "Patricia, it's been a while. What brings you here? You never really liked sports." "Well, Edward, people change," she replied with a restrained smile. "I'm here to see my son. He's debuting today." Edward felt a tightness in his chest. "And are you alone, or is John with you?" he asked, unable to hide a hint of provocation in his voice. Patricia looked at him with a mixture of surprise and disappointment. "John? I haven't seen him since our separation. A few years later, I met a wonderful man and remarried. By the way, he must be waiting for me. I wish you all the best, Edward." She stepped away, leaving Edward with his thoughts. The game was about to start and the players were announced. When the name Christopher echoed through the gymnasium, Edward was shocked. The young man who walked onto the court was like a mirror image of himself in his youth. The same features, the same athletic build, even the way of running was identical. Edward felt his blood run cold. There was no doubt that was his son. Patricia was telling the truth. Throughout the entire match, Edward couldn't take his eyes off Christopher. Every movement of the boy was a painful confirmation of the terrible mistake he had made years ago. When the game ended, with Christopher scoring the winning point, Edward saw Patricia and her husband run to embrace the young man, overflowing with pride. Overwhelmed by emotion, Edward waited for the gym to empty out and approached Christopher. The young man recognized him immediately. "My mother showed me a picture of you once and asked if I would like to meet you," said Christopher, with surprising calmness. Edward, not knowing what to say, simply nodded. "Mr. Edward," Christopher continued, "I have no resentment towards you. I have no right to. It was my mother who should have felt it, but she never did either. She always told me that you gave her the best gift she could ever receive." Edward felt tears forming in his eyes. "Do you know why I never wanted to meet you?" Christopher asked. "Because to me, you're just a man in a photo. My father is right there." He pointed to the man who had embraced him moments before, Patricia's husband. "That man there chose to be my father." Christopher's words hit Edward like a punch in the stomach. He stood there, paralyzed, as the young man walked away to join his family. The family that Edward could have had but squandered away due to his pride and insecurity. That night, alone in his large empty house, Edward cried like never before. He realized too late that we can try to pretend our past mistakes never existed, but one day the consequences exact their toll. He had missed the chance to witness the growth of that wonderful son, to be part of a loving family. Edward understood that life is made of choices and that each decision we make shapes not only our future, but also the future of those around us. He had chosen distrust over trust, pride over love. And now, all he had left were the memories of what could have been and the painful awareness of what he had lost. If you enjoyed, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment with a number from 1 to 5 to let us know how much you liked the story. Also, watch the video that is currently on your screen. See you soon.